Publicly humiliated, trapped in a corporate nightmare, and betrayed by the man she once loved, Madison Clarke faces the ultimate test. Reclaim her power, protect her unborn child, and confront Harper Reed in a courtroom battle that could destroy an empire. Who will survive when trust is broken and stakes are life-changing? Madison Clarke entered the grand ballroom with careful poise, her eyes scanning the crowd of corporate elites, journalists, and investors, expecting recognition for her professional accomplishments. Yet the instant she stepped in, a subtle tension filled the air that she could not ignore. The seating arrangements, the strategic positioning of cameras, and even the flow of introductions seemed deliberately designed to isolate her, elevating Harper Reed, her ex-husband Nathaniel Sterling's mistress, as the centerpiece of attention. Nathaniel Sterling, the billionaire CEO, sat composed at the head table, his posture neutral and unreadable, silently allowing Harper's presence to dominate without interference. Every smile, gesture, and deliberate tilt of Harper's head reinforced her psychological dominance, subtly signaling to every observer that she now commanded control of the room. Security personnel subtly guided Madison away from prime vantage points, ensuring her visibility was minimal, while timing of announcements and spotlight moments highlighted Harper's authority. Cameras flashed in precise intervals, capturing Harper's every confident move while leaving Madison in the shadow of public perception. Madison felt the weight of her unborn child as more than a personal concern. It became a silent leverage point, a symbol of inheritance and vulnerability that others could exploit in ways she had yet to fully anticipate. Despite the humiliation, Madison's mind worked rapidly, cataloging vulnerabilities, identifying potential allies, and noting subtle power shifts. The grandeur of the gala, the chandeliers casting refracted light across mirrored walls, the soft orchestration of background music, and the reflective surfaces amplifying the presence of Harper, only served to magnify Madison's isolation. Every interaction among board members and investors, every whispered conversation, and every cautious glance seemed orchestrated to reinforce a hierarchy in which Madison had been deliberately marginalized. Yet she remained outwardly composed, walking through the gala with grace, even as her mind absorbed every detail for future strategic advantage. Minor mistakes and signs of overconfidence from both Harper and Nathaniel were carefully logged. Each was a potential opening for disruption that could be exploited in the coming days. The gala, outwardly an elegant professional celebration, had transformed into a calculated psychological battleground, where each gesture and sequence of events was designed to communicate a subtle but unmistakable message. Madison's influence was no longer welcome in the central narrative of the Sterling Empire. She analyzed the situation with sharp clarity, noting which investors deferred to Harper's suggestions, which advisors whispered in agreement, and which executives hesitated when interacting with her. The gala's choreography was flawless in appearance, yet Madison recognized the patterns, the deliberate spacing of interactions, the timing of applause, and the sequencing of introductions, all carefully arranged to diminish her authority and elevate Harper's visibility. Madison's humiliation was public and theatrical, but it also offered insight. The patterns revealed weaknesses in Harper's reliance on Nathaniel's attention and overconfidence in predictable reactions. Each minor oversight or hesitation by Harper or Nathaniel was mentally logged as a potential pivot point, a way to regain influence once the right strategy was in motion. Madison's awareness of these subtleties began to transform her feelings of isolation and embarrassment into analytical observation, turning emotional pain into actionable intelligence. While the gala progressed, Madison recognized that the humiliation was only one layer of a much larger campaign. Harper's control over perception, coupled with Nathaniel's inaction, had created an environment where Madison appeared powerless, but the carefully measured confidence and patience she maintained allowed her to observe and record every manipulation for future leverage. Every detail, from subtle facial expressions of board members to the sequence of floor movements across the ballroom, was mentally noted for strategic advantage. Madison understood that this public event was only a surface reflection of private maneuvers in corporate power, legal control, and future inheritance. Her observations revealed that Harper's influence was both psychological and procedural, creating a delicate structure that relied on perception as much as control over formal authority. Then, As the gala reached its crescendo and the audience's attention seemed fully captured by Harper's radiant presence, Madison's phone vibrated discreetly. A confidential alert appeared on the screen, revealing that the Sterling Trust, intended to safeguard her unborn child's inheritance, had been altered without her consent. The realization hit with a sharp clarity. The gala's public humiliation was only the beginning, a distraction from an immediate and private threat to her child and her authority. In that moment, the event transformed from a ceremonial display into a personal emergency, forcing Madison to confront the reality that the stakes were higher than she had imagined. Her humiliation had provided insight, but now it was accompanied by urgent evidence of betrayal and manipulation that demanded immediate strategic thought. Every gesture, observation, and detail from the evening would become critical in planning her next moves, as the foundations of her influence, authority, and the security of her child's legacy were now under direct threat. Madison's mind raced as she processed the confidential alert. Unauthorized changes to the Sterling Trust threatened her unborn child, signaling that the real battle had only just begun, and that she would need all her intelligence, patience, and strategic foresight to reclaim control. Harper Reed moved through the corridors of corporate power with a grace that made every action seem effortless, but beneath each smile and composed gesture lay a strategy honed to dominate, manipulate, and consolidate control. From the moment Madison Clarke's public humiliation at the gala had set the stage, Harper had understood that her influence depended not only on wealth or title but on perception, loyalty, and the careful orchestration of every subtle interaction. Investor perception became a tool in her hands, every conversation, recommendation, and casual remark calibrated to erode Madison's credibility while presenting Harper as indispensable to the Sterling Empire's future. Boardroom dynamics shifted under her subtle influence, with key advisors deferring to her judgment and echoing her priorities without overt acknowledgement of her strategic intent. Each calculated move ensured that Madison's position was gradually diminished, yet remained outwardly seamless, maintaining the illusion of routine corporate operations while masking a relentless consolidation of power. Harper's public charm was a weapon as potent as any legal maneuver. Every smile, every carefully timed laugh, and every shift in posture drew Nathaniel Sterling's attention, reinforcing the perception that Harper was the central figure in both his personal and professional world. This constant visibility subtly undermined Madison, whose presence became increasingly peripheral in decision-making and public recognition. Harper's gestures, whether an approving nod in a meeting or a pointed glance toward an influential investor, functioned as psychological tools, signaling dominance without a single word of confrontation. She understood the quiet, almost invisible ways in which power could be asserted, using perception, subtle intimidation, and strategic attention to craft an environment where opposition seemed futile. Beyond public influence, Harper exploited the structural mechanics of corporate control. Legal loopholes, procedural ambiguities, and the flexible interpretation of governance rules allowed her to reduce Madison's operational influence, restricting access to critical information, financial decisions, and resource allocation. Each adjustment was carefully documented, appearing unremarkable to casual observers yet cumulatively shifting authority away from Madison. Harper's precision ensured that every move strengthened her control over the Sterling Empire while minimizing risk of exposure or backlash. Nathaniel's continued inaction, whether from complacency or deliberate calculation, reinforced her untouchable image, signaling to board members, investors, and staff alike that her dominance was sanctioned and immutable. Madison, despite the growing marginalization, observed everything with analytical clarity. She noted Harper's patterns of timing, behavior, and reliance on certain advisors, cataloging both predictable moves and subtle vulnerabilities. Harper's overconfidence, though expertly masked, left small openings. An over-reliance on Nathaniel's attention, repeated gestures that became predictable cues, and minor lapses in oversight. Madison understood that wealth and influence were insufficient to maintain power indefinitely. Perception and loyalty were equally vital, and these were areas where Harper could be subtly challenged. Each interaction, conversation, and decision became data, building a map of Harper's methods and psychological strategy. The balance of power increasingly favored Harper, with every public gesture and operational adjustment reinforcing her control. Allies monitored communications, reported shifts in information flow, and ensured that the empire's daily operations aligned with her priorities. Corporate decisions, from project approvals to allocation of resources, bent subtly in Harper's favor, unnoticed by the casual yet strategically significant in consolidating her influence. Madison understood that the empire's structural alignment, combined with Harper's careful cultivation of perception, created a formidable barrier. Yet she also recognized that the larger network of advisors and board members included individuals whose loyalty was negotiable, whose decisions could be influenced with timing, patience, and calculated exposure of inconsistencies. Harper's strategy relied on a careful mix of visibility, subtle intimidation, and control of the narrative. Every advisor, investor, and subordinate became an instrument in the broader plan, either consciously aligned or subtly guided toward compliance. The public perception of inevitability, Harper's success as both a social and professional force, was meticulously maintained, masking the incremental shifts in control that marginalized Madison. Each small operational adjustment reinforced the hierarchy and created an environment where opposition appeared futile. Madison's patience and observation were the counterbalance, preparing her to exploit the first significant lapse or miscalculation. As the days progressed, Madison pieced together the scope of Harper's network. Each strategic alignment, every minor manipulation, and every calculated overreach became evidence of an overarching plan to consolidate power completely. Harper's combination of charm, timing, and procedural mastery made her appear untouchable, yet Madison's careful attention to detail revealed cracks that could be exploited with precise action. The more Madison observed, the clearer it became that Harper's dominance, though formidable, was built on a structure of perception and subtle influence that could be challenged if the right leverage points were identified. Madison discovers a hidden corporate plan detailing Harper's attempt to seize full control of her unborn child's inheritance, revealing a direct and calculated threat that forces her to prepare an unprecedented strategic and legal counterattack. Beneath the glittering lights and polished surfaces of the Sterling Empire, Madison Clarke began to uncover a network of corporate betrayal so intricate it threatened to dismantle everything she had believed she could trust. Top advisors, who outwardly presented themselves as neutral and loyal to the company's vision, had quietly aligned with Harper Reed, viewing her as the inevitable leader of the empire and positioning themselves to support her ascent. These covert alliances were subtle, hidden behind polite conversation, careful phrasing in reports, and strategic omissions during meetings. Madison, attentive to every nuance, began to notice small inconsistencies, delayed memos, unexplained reallocations, and quietly shifted authority that, when viewed together, painted a picture of systematic exclusion. She discovered discrepancies in trust documents, asset transfers, and allocations, revealing that decisions were being made without her awareness, and that the mechanisms designed to protect her influence were being undermined from within. Whispers circulated among lower-level executives and mid-tier managers, hinting at imminent reallocation of corporate assets and privileges that would strip Madison of her operational authority. Publicly, these maneuvers appeared routine. An adjustment here, a reallocation there. But privately, the consequences were catastrophic, threatening to consolidate Harper's control and diminish Madison's power. The structure of the empire was being altered piece by piece, leaving Madison increasingly isolated in a landscape she had once understood and controlled. Every seemingly minor procedural change had a ripple effect, shifting influence, reassigning responsibilities, and realigning loyalties in ways that favored Harper. Madison realized that the betrayal was systemic. It was not the result of a single misstep, but a coordinated effort to undermine her authority and reshape the power hierarchy to Harper's advantage. To fully grasp the extent of the manipulation, Madison traced communication leaks, analyzing emails, internal memos, and informal exchanges. She began mapping a sprawling network of influence and coercion, identifying individuals who were complicit, those who could be persuaded, and those whose loyalty remained uncertain. Each node in the network revealed vulnerabilities that, if leveraged correctly, could help her regain influence and protect her child's future. Corporate manipulations, while appearing routine on the surface, were carefully designed to avoid detection, using layers of bureaucracy and subtle procedural adjustments to mask their intent. Madison realized that to counter this, She would need not only legal expertise but also strategic insight into human behavior, understanding motivations, ambitions, and fear as tools to be exploited. As she delved deeper, Madison identified specific advisors who could be coerced or bribed to support her cause, understanding that the empire's most loyal-appearing members were not necessarily immovable. The betrayal extended beyond immediate authority. It reached into the very structures designed to secure her unborn child's inheritance, creating a situation in which personal, financial, and professional stakes were inseparably entwined. Madison began preparing a meticulous plan of counteraction, combining legal maneuvering with strategic influence over advisors, investors, and corporate processes. Every decision was calculated to restore her position while limiting exposure and preventing further undermining by Harper's network. The atmosphere within the Sterling Empire had shifted. What once appeared as orderly corporate operations now revealed themselves as a carefully orchestrated theater of influence, manipulation, and psychological dominance. Madison's understanding of the systemic betrayal allowed her to anticipate moves, identify weaknesses, and position herself for targeted interventions. She tracked subtle power shifts, noting who deferred to Harper without question, who hesitated, and who could be swayed. Each observation fed into a growing mental map of the corporate landscape, guiding the timing and precision of her next moves. Despite the complexity and scale of the network arrayed against her, Madison's clarity of purpose sharpened. She recognized that restoring her authority required patience, insight, and the ability to act decisively when the right opportunities emerged. The strategic counterattack she envisioned was not merely reactive. It involved leveraging Harper's overconfidence, exploiting procedural loopholes, and carefully orchestrating communications to reclaim influence in a manner that would be legally unassailable and operationally effective. Every piece of the empire's structure, financial oversight, board decision-making, resource allocation, and advisor loyalty, became a variable in her plan. In the midst of her analysis, Madison discovered that a key board member had been bribed to support Harper, complicating her counter-strategy and signaling that the next moves would require not only legal ingenuity but precise timing and strategic foresight to protect both her authority and her child's inheritance. Madison Clarke felt the weight of her pregnancy not only in her body but in every aspect of her professional and personal life, realizing that what should have been a period of anticipation and preparation had instead become a source of vulnerability meticulously exploited by Harper Reed. The corporate trust structures, once thought to protect her influence over her child's future inheritance, had been subtly altered to diminish her authority, redirect decision-making power, and restrict access to financial instruments critical to safeguarding her child's interests. Harper, aware of the psychological leverage inherent in Madison's condition, intensified pressure at every opportunity, using the unborn child as a silent yet potent tool to isolate Madison from allies and reinforce Harper's dominance. Every meeting, every communication, and every corporate maneuver seemed calibrated to remind Madison of her perceived fragility, creating a pervasive sense of vulnerability that heightened the stakes of every interaction. Physical susceptibility due to pregnancy amplified the psychological tension, making even minor corporate challenges feel urgent and potentially dangerous, while the constant observation by advisors, board members, and Harper's loyalists left Madison feeling perpetually scrutinized and evaluated. Despite the pressure, Madison began to transform this vulnerability into strategic insight, recognizing that her maternal instincts and concern for her unborn child could serve as motivation to anticipate moves, identify weaknesses, and plan countermeasures with greater precision than ever before. She started mapping subtle operational manipulations that painted her as ineffectual or uncertain, recognizing how Harper leveraged perceptions to undermine confidence among staff, investors, and board members. Each seemingly minor misstep by Madison, or even the perception of a delay due to pregnancy, was magnified to create an image of incompetence. Yet Madison viewed each of these as predictable patterns that could be studied, leveraged, and ultimately reversed. Gaps in oversight, security, and decision-making processes became points of potential leverage, allowing her to intervene strategically, influence outcomes, and safeguard both her authority and the future of her child. Madison's approach was methodical. She converted the relentless pressure she faced into actionable intelligence, assessing every operational adjustment, every reallocation of responsibility, and every subtle alignment of power in the empire. The alliances she had relied upon were no longer static. Loyalty had to be tested under the lens of heightened stakes, and she had to reassess which board members, advisors, and corporate intermediaries could be influenced or relied upon. Each legal and operational move became a test of resilience, requiring Madison to anticipate counteractions, manage perceptions, and deploy strategic influence without exposing her vulnerabilities prematurely. The interplay of psychological pressure and maternal instinct forced her to remain constantly alert, transforming every interaction into a calculated negotiation of power, influence, and information. Even as Harper continued to assert control through subtle gestures, public charm, and strategic alliances, Madison recognized that the empire's structure itself contained leverage points that could be exploited. Every procedural oversight, every hesitating advisor, and every gap in communication represented an opportunity to reclaim authority. Her pregnancy, once a source of weakness, had become a motivator for precision, patience, and tactical calculation. Madison's awareness of Harper's methods, the way she manipulated perceptions, directed attention, and leveraged legal structures, allowed Madison to anticipate moves, prepare countermoves, and position herself strategically for future confrontations. The psychological battlefield became a mirror of the corporate and legal landscape, where maternal instinct and strategic foresight intertwined to guide each decision. The stakes of each maneuver were magnified by the potential impact on her child's future. Every trust structure, every allocation, and every legal precedent could determine the inheritance and security of her unborn child, and Madison approached each challenge with a dual focus on operational effectiveness and maternal protection. Alliances were continually evaluated. Each potential supporter or adversary was analyzed for susceptibility, loyalty, and influence. Madison recognized that to reclaim influence and secure her child's legacy, she needed a strategy that combined patience, intelligence gathering, and decisive interventions executed at the optimal moment. Every misstep or lapse could have long-term consequences. Yet the pressure refined her focus, sharpening her insight into the patterns of control and manipulation within the Sterling Empire. As Madison reviewed internal audits and trust documents, she discovered unauthorized changes to the Sterling Trust that directly threatened her unborn child, confirming that Harper's subtle manipulations had escalated into an immediate and tangible danger, forcing Madison to prepare for a rapid and decisive strategic countermeasure. In the labyrinthine corridors of corporate power, Madison Clarke realized that every interaction carried weight far beyond the surface. Where friends might conceal ambition behind loyalty and enemies could unexpectedly become allies. She reached out discreetly to her trusted corporate contacts, testing support for her position while observing subtle behavioral cues that revealed intentions. Some allies, outwardly supportive, were quietly aligned with Harper Reed, motivated by personal gain and ambition, carefully masking their betrayal behind feigned loyalty. Madison's awareness of these duplicities forced her to refine her perception, interpreting subtle signals in communication, timing, and decision-making as evidence of hidden agendas. Yet in this shadowed landscape, she found an unexpected ally who provided critical insights into vulnerabilities within Harper's network, revealing gaps in influence, loyalty, and operational control that could be leveraged in her favor. Each revelation became a key piece of intelligence, allowing Madison to recalibrate her strategy with precision, balancing caution with calculated risk as she navigated a world where trust had become a rare and valuable currency. Observation became Madison's primary tool, guiding her interactions and decisions as she carefully evaluated board members and advisors for loyalty, susceptibility, and potential for influence. Subtle communications, an email phrasing, an offhand comment in a meeting, a glance at the right moment, were used as instruments to test allegiances, prompting reactions that revealed hidden inclinations and susceptibilities. Through these careful tests, she identified which advisors could be swayed to her side without exposure, noting those who required additional observation or indirect influence. Strategic patience became paramount. Madison learned to act only when conditions aligned to minimize risk and maximize effect, isolating threats methodically while consolidating covert support from individuals whose loyalty could be nurtured or leveraged over time. Each small maneuver strengthened her position while incrementally weakening Harper's influence, turning the subtle psychological battlefield into a network of advantage that could be exploited for both operational control and legal leverage. As Madison navigated this precarious terrain, she recognized that influence was rarely absolute and that even seemingly steadfast allies could falter under pressure. Her assessment of loyalty extended beyond overt actions to include subtle hesitations, inconsistencies, and patterns of behavior that hinted at shifting priorities. In a world where misreading a single interaction could result in strategic compromise, she refined her methods for interpreting intent, using each engagement to gather data and create a comprehensive understanding of the complex web of power surrounding her. The dual nature of each connection, friend or foe, required careful calibration, ensuring that each step forward strengthened her authority while exposing the vulnerabilities in Harper's carefully maintained network. Madison's patience and analytical approach allowed her to anticipate moves, counter potential betrayals, and subtly manipulate the perception of control to her advantage. The delicate interplay between influence, loyalty, and perception created a high-stakes game in which Madison had to act with precision and foresight. Every decision, from discreet outreach to nuanced intervention in advisory discussions, became part of a strategic framework designed to reclaim operational authority and protect her child's inheritance. Madison monitored patterns of communication within the network, noting who deferred to Harper's guidance and who hesitated or questioned directions, mapping potential allies and opponents alike. Each test of loyalty provided actionable insight, enabling Madison to plan interventions that could strengthen alliances, shift perceptions, and exploit vulnerabilities without revealing her hand. The psychological pressure inherent in these interactions intensified as Madison realized that Harper's dominance depended on controlling not only resources and authority, but also the perceptions of influence among key stakeholders. By creating doubt, demonstrating competence, and leveraging intelligence, Madison began to slowly undermine Harper's carefully constructed image. Calculated, deliberate, and patient, her approach relied on understanding the subtle ways in which loyalty could be influenced and perceptions could be shaped, ensuring that each move advanced her position while minimizing the risk of exposure or retaliation. Each advisor persuaded, each hesitancy observed, and each subtle shift in allegiance became part of a larger strategy that incrementally shifted the balance of power. In the midst of analyzing these intricate networks, Madison uncovers a clandestine meeting between Harper and key investors, the implications of which threatened to strip her of both public credibility and legal authority, signaling that the next phase of the struggle will require precise timing, strategic foresight, and decisive action to protect her position and her child's future. Humiliation, once sharp and disorienting, had transformed into a catalyst for Madison Clarke, igniting a careful and calculated ascent that would redefine her role within the Sterling Empire. Having been marginalized publicly and systematically undermined in the wake of Harper Reid's manipulations, Madison began leveraging the same corporate channels that had previously been used against her. Every communication line, from boardroom memos to informal investor updates, became a conduit through which she could observe, influence, and prepare strategic responses. She meticulously collected evidence of Harper's subtle manipulations, cataloging every misstep, misdirection, and act of collusion, while also noting Nathaniel Sterling's complacency or tacit complicity that had allowed the marginalization to unfold. This intelligence formed the foundation of a counterattack that was both operationally precise and psychologically sophisticated, designed to protect her unborn child while gradually dismantling Harper's carefully constructed power. Madison's network expanded as she recruited discreet allies across multiple disciplines. Legal experts provided insight into corporate governance and trust structures, allowing her to identify vulnerabilities in Harper's procedural dominance. Financial analysts traced asset flows and detected subtle reallocations, exposing patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. Media contacts offered channels to influence public perception subtly, ensuring that any strategic moves she executed would be reinforced by shifts in narrative without triggering direct confrontation. Each element of this coalition was carefully chosen and coordinated to complement Madison's larger plan, creating a web of support that strengthened her influence while isolating Harper's power. Small victories, from exposing procedural oversights to quietly redirecting resources, reinforced Madison's confidence and built strategic momentum, demonstrating that even the most carefully constructed facade of dominance could be undermined with patience and insight. Operational gaps became the arena of Madison's counterattack. She identified weaknesses in oversight, reporting structures, and resource allocation, exploiting them to create leverage that simultaneously advanced her influence and weakened Harper's control. Every intervention was timed with precision, exploiting psychological patterns, overconfidence, or predictable reliance on Nathaniel's tacit support. These moves were subtle, often imperceptible to the casual observer, yet cumulatively shifted the balance of power in Madison's favor. Investor confidence, once firmly aligned with Harper's vision, began to waver as subtle signals and carefully orchestrated exposure of vulnerabilities indicated that Madison's strategic acumen and authority could not be ignored. Each calculated step reinforced a framework of control, establishing Madison not merely as a reactive participant but as a silent architect of influence within the empire. She maintained patience, carefully sequencing interventions to maximize effect while minimizing exposure, understanding that impulsive or visible actions could be countered or neutralized by Harper. Psychological insight guided every move, predicting responses, adjusting strategies, and maintaining an aura of deliberate confidence that allowed her to operate under the radar while reshaping internal perceptions. Even as Harper continued to project dominance externally, Madison's careful orchestration of operational, legal, and perceptual levers quietly undermined that control, creating an environment in which Harper's overconfidence and reliance on perception became liabilities. The integration of maternal protection with strategic intervention added complexity to Madison's approach. Every move had to consider not only immediate corporate advantage but also the long-term security of her unborn child, requiring precision in legal maneuvering, asset management, and boardroom influence. She balanced these priorities with patience, ensuring that each tactical success reinforced both her operational position and her moral authority, signaling competence, resilience, and strategic foresight. The empire's internal dynamics shifted incrementally. Subtle realignments of loyalty, recalibration of influence, and exposure of procedural vulnerabilities slowly eroded Harper's unquestioned dominance. Madison's rise was marked by disciplined observation, the judicious deployment of influence, and a deep understanding of psychological leverage. She monitored reactions from board members, advisors, and investors, anticipating defensive moves from Harper and ensuring that her actions remained one step ahead. Every legal challenge prepared, every resource redirected, and every subtle hint of exposure was coordinated to maximize strategic gain while keeping Madison's intentions opaque. The careful orchestration of these elements allowed her to consolidate momentum, reinforcing the perception of competence, authority, and inevitability in a way that simultaneously protected her child and undermined Harper's network. As Madison penetrated Harper's confidential planning and internal communications, she uncovered vulnerabilities so critical that their exposure could collapse Harper's influence entirely, signaling a pivotal moment in the battle for control of the Sterling Empire and setting the stage for decisive confrontation. Madison Clarke, having meticulously gathered evidence of Harper Reid's manipulations and influence, began a strategic campaign to expose the vulnerabilities that Harper had carefully concealed behind charm, public confidence, and perceived control. She leaked key pieces of information to investors and board members in a measured, calculated fashion, ensuring that the revelations appeared credible, verifiable, and impossible to ignore. Where Harper had once commanded applause and unquestioned admiration, these carefully timed disclosures shifted perception, replacing applause with whispers, doubt, and quiet scrutiny that began to erode her carefully constructed credibility. Board members who had previously deferred to Harper without question now began to ask pointed, subtle questions about her integrity, decision-making processes, and the alignment of her priorities with the long-term health of the Sterling Empire. Even Nathaniel Sterling, whose silent complicity had allowed Harper to thrive, began to show subtle signs of unease as investor confidence wavered, sending tremors through the previously unshakable structure of control. Harper, sensing that the balance of power was shifting, attempted to reassert dominance by reallocating resources, directing attention toward operational priorities, and signaling a more aggressive posture within the organization. These defensive moves, however, revealed cracks in her armor. Overextensions, misalignments in support, and exposed dependencies that Madison had anticipated and cataloged. Every misstep, no matter how small, was noted, analyzed, and integrated into Madison's larger strategy. Each disclosure and observation was carefully timed to maximize impact, creating a controlled escalation of pressure that forced Harper into reactive, rather than proactive, maneuvers. Investor behavior mirrored this subtle shift. Hesitations in commitments, cautious reassessments of priorities, and inquiries about operational decisions reinforced Harper's growing vulnerabilities and created new openings for Madison to exploit. Strategic alliances within the boardroom and advisory circles began to realign. Advisors who had once been firm supporters of Harper began to hedge their loyalties, uncertain whether continued allegiance served their interests as investor scrutiny intensified. Each subtle shift in perception increased the psychological and operational pressure on Harper, forcing her to devote energy to defensive maneuvers while Madison maintained patience, controlling the pace of escalation and ensuring that each revelation had the maximum possible impact without compromising her own position. Madison's approach balanced subtlety with precision, ensuring that every intervention strengthened her credibility, reinforced her authority, and undermined Harper's perceived control. The carefully orchestrated exposure of Harper's weaknesses also extended to operational vulnerabilities. Madison exploited gaps in reporting structures, inconsistencies in resource allocation, and the hesitations of advisors who were beginning to question previous assumptions. By strategically revealing these weaknesses, she created an environment where Harper's confidence began to crack under the dual pressure of investor scrutiny and internal doubt. Harper's outward composure, previously a source of intimidation, was gradually undermined by the accumulating evidence of errors, omissions, and strategic overreach, forcing her to divert attention from proactive control to reactive management. Madison, observing this shift, reinforced her influence incrementally, leveraging each hesitation and misalignment to strengthen her own position. Every move was precise and calculated, with Madison timing disclosures and interventions to maximize both psychological and operational effect. Each board meeting, investor discussion, and subtle communication became a stage for reinforcing Harper's vulnerabilities, while presenting Madison as competent, measured, and indispensable. The careful orchestration of pressure, observation, and influence created an escalating tension, drawing board members and investors into a pattern where Harper's control seemed less inevitable and Madison's strategic capacity increasingly evident. Psychological leverage, operational insight, and precise timing combined to gradually tip the balance of power, signaling a fundamental shift in authority. Harper, realizing that her network of influence is being methodically dismantled and that her image is under scrutiny, discovers Madison's maneuver and begins plotting a counterattack, escalating the stakes and signaling that the battle for control of the Sterling Empire has entered a dangerously unpredictable phase. Nathaniel Sterling, confident in his status as the undisputed leader of the Sterling Empire, failed to recognize the depth of Madison Clarke's strategic acumen, viewing the unfolding power struggle primarily through the lens of wealth preservation rather than loyalty, perception, or subtle influence. This blind spot allowed operational vulnerabilities to surface quietly, unnoticed by the public or even by some of his closest advisors. Minor oversights in reporting lines, delayed approvals, and inconsistencies in resource allocation became cracks in the empire's foundation, creating tension among investors and internal stakeholders who sensed uncertainty but could not fully articulate it. Madison, fully aware of the subtleties, began to exploit these gaps, transforming seemingly minor lapses into actionable leverage that could shift both perception and operational control in her favor. Harper Reed, once assured of Nathaniel's unwavering support, began to doubt the reliability of their alliance as Madison's influence became increasingly visible and effective. The subtle instability created hesitation among advisors, who started reassessing loyalties and questioning previously unquestioned alignments. Madison observed each hesitation, each minor shift in behavior, converting it into strategic advantage, carefully planning interventions that would maximize impact without exposing her intentions prematurely. Every ripple of uncertainty in investor sentiment, every adjustment in boardroom dynamics, became an instrument through which Madison could gradually recalibrate authority and influence. The empire's internal operations, once considered rigid and predictable, revealed hidden gaps under Madison's scrutiny. Financial flows, procedural oversight, and managerial decision-making all contained points of leverage that she could exploit, creating pressure on both Harper and Nathaniel. Each intervention was calculated with precision, leveraging timing, psychological insight, and the anticipation of responses to maximize effect while minimizing exposure. Madison understood that destabilizing the perceived control of the CEO required patience, subtlety, and the ability to turn internal hesitation into external influence. The smallest misalignment, when exploited strategically, could ripple outward, undermining Harper's dominance and eroding the confidence of investors and advisors alike. Incremental interventions allowed Madison to reshape the internal perception of authority. Each calculated adjustment, from reallocating influence among hesitant advisors to subtly exposing procedural gaps, destabilized Nathaniel's previously unchallenged control while presenting Madison as competent, decisive, and strategically superior. Observing the reactions of Harper and the executive team, Madison noted where overconfidence, reliance on assumed support, or lapses in attention could be leveraged to create operational and psychological advantages. Her careful orchestration ensured that each action reinforced her authority and gradually shifted the perception of power without triggering a direct confrontation that could alert Harper or Nathaniel to her intentions. Financial vulnerabilities, once hidden behind routine oversight, became tools of strategic leverage. Madison mapped every gap, inconsistency, and delay, correlating them with behavioral patterns in Harper's team and investor responses. Each small exposure of weakness, when timed correctly, magnified uncertainty and reassessed loyalties, creating openings that allowed her to apply subtle but undeniable pressure. Advisors who had previously appeared unwavering began hesitating in decision-making, reflecting the cumulative effect of Madison's strategic interventions. Even Nathaniel, long considered the stabilizing anchor of the empire, failed to perceive the full implications of these shifts, his blind spot magnifying the opportunities Madison could exploit. As tensions increased, Madison positioned herself to exploit vulnerabilities at precisely the right moment. Her interventions, carefully timed and deliberately measured, began to unsettle Harper's confidence and fracture the perceived cohesion of the executive team. Investor sentiment, influenced subtly by disclosures, hesitations, and operational inefficiencies, began to shift in Madison's favor, creating a growing perception that control was no longer entirely in Harper's hands. Madison's patience, combined with her analytical rigor, allowed her to guide the unfolding crisis to her advantage, ensuring that each decision strengthened her operational and legal position while leaving Harper exposed and reactive. Through observation, anticipation, and the deliberate application of strategic leverage, Madison converted Nathaniel's oversight and Harper's overconfidence into tangible opportunities for consolidation of power. Each gap in governance, every moment of hesitation, and each operational weakness became part of a carefully mapped framework for reclaiming control and protecting the future of her unborn child. By maintaining composure, patience, and precision, Madison ensured that her actions would destabilize Harper's influence while maximizing her own authority in the eyes of both the board and investors. As Madison analyzed the empire's financial and operational structures in detail, she uncovered a loophole so significant that it could instantly freeze Harper's access to key resources, signaling the potential for a decisive shift in the balance of power within the Sterling Empire and setting the stage for a confrontation that could redefine authority entirely. As Madison carefully navigates the storm of betrayal, every twist and turn could have changed the course of her life and her child's future. Watching her strategy unfold reveals how small decisions can tip the balance of power in unexpected ways. Stay with the story until the very end. You won't want to miss a single moment of the fallout, and seeing how every move plays out could change how you view trust, loyalty, and influence. If this journey surprises or inspires you, let others witness it too, and make sure to keep up with each revelation. After all the twists, the secrets, and the calculated moves, the question remains. If you were in Madison's shoes, would you prioritize exposing the betrayal immediately or patiently rebuilding your influence before striking back? Think carefully. Your answer might reveal what kind of strategy you would choose when trust is shattered and the stakes are everything. Comment below with your choice.